Hey, everybody. Welcome to the final session of today for our Open Campus event. We've got our founder, Chris Dutton, presenting data visualization and storytelling pro tips. As many of you who've been on the earlier sessions know, Chris has been feeling like extremely under the weather. It was very touch and go whether or not he was going to be able to join us. But for anybody who has a similar amount of gray hair to me, you'll remember back in 1997, Jordan playing through the flu and nearly collapsing on the court to defeat the Utah Jazz in Game 5. Chris is our best player, and this is a similar moment for us. So I had to embarrass him a little bit. But
I'm not often compared to Michael Jordan, so I do appreciate that very much.
Hey, when it comes to data, you know. So just a reminder to everybody or anybody who's on their first session today, this is part of our Open Campus Week. It's 3 days of live sessions with Maven instructors and some other data experts that we're bringing in. We are also making the entire course library free for the first time ever. You can go to mavenanalytics.io/open-campus to learn more about what sessions we have going on, and then also sign up for your free account. Please, please, please come in, take as many courses as you want. It's a really special thing for us, and we hope that people are going to build some skills around it. So today we focused on data skills. There were sessions on Excel, SQL, Power BI, Python, and now this one covering data visualization. I'll post a link in the chat where you can go and get all of these on demand if you missed them. Tomorrow, we're going to have some data career sessions with Lauren and Annie talking about their recent career transition and tips for folks who are trying to break into their first data role. Then we'll have Dustin Schimek. He's got this really detailed report about the state of the job market, amazing stuff in terms of what tools people are looking for, how much experience, salary stuff. It's really awesome. It's got too much content to do in an hour, so we'll see exactly what Dustin covers tomorrow, but it's just amazing stuff. And then you'll have Enrique teaching you how to build an amazing project portfolio to really bring your skills to life and attract the attention of employers. And you'll have Chris again at the end of tomorrow walking you through the data analyst interview and how to make sure that you can turn those opportunities into jobs. The final day, Chris will be taking you through some of the common career paths, talking about the difference between data analyst, data scientist, data engineer, and kind of what you can expect in each of those roles, who's a good fit for each one. Then we'll have Kristen. She'll be talking about her kind of meandering journey through data as an analyst, a data scientist, machine learning engineer, running her own consultancy, being an author. So just fantastic and exciting story that she'll tell. Hopefully will give you some flavors of things that you might want to try in your career. Then we'll have Alice. She has been a university professor, helping with over 400 different data science projects for students. She's going to share some of her best lessons there. And I will close out the week on Friday with our data career learning guide. We'll give you a great checklist that you can walk through, make it nice and easy for you. And we'll also go pretty deep on some of the things that we haven't covered today. So that said, everybody, please go to mavenanalytics.io. Take advantage of the free courses that we have over the next week, and we hope to see you in some of these other sessions. I will turn it over to our founder, Chris Dutton, and he's going to walk you through data visualization.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. That was quite an intro, John. And I think the Michael Jordan of Excel has kind of a nice ring to it. So we might have to, that one might have to stick for a bit. So for those of you who heard from me this morning, I apologize for the froggy voice. Please bear with me. This is a really unfortunately timed illness, but you know, Enrique begged me to take this session. He said, please let me deliver the data viz and storytelling session. I said, nope, I care about this one too much. I love data viz too much not to deliver this one. So I'm really excited to run you guys through this. Let me go ahead and share my screen and let me know if we can get into slideshow mode here. How's that looking for everyone? Good.
Looks great.
Awesome. And thank you for the get well wishes and the healing vibes. I appreciate that very much. So let's talk about data visualization, right? Simple definition, data visualization is all about bringing your data to life. So as human beings, we weren't evolved to be able to interpret and handle raw data. It's a relatively new and novel concept. We were evolved to understand things like visual cues, clear patterns to help us make sense of complex information. So I like to start this session off with the world's quickest science lesson. We're going to talk about two different parts of the brain. You've got your prefrontal cortex in your frontal lobe. This is what's responsible for cognitive thinking and problem solving. It happens slow and consciously, and it's that part of the brain that helps us make sense of non-visual information and stimuli, things like raw data. All the way in the back of your brain, you've got the visual cortex. That's in your occipital lobe. It's responsible for visual perception and understanding. This thinking happens instantaneously and subconsciously, and it's how we make sense of things like colors, patterns, shapes, relative sizes, stuff like that. So the beauty of data visualization is that it puts these two parts of our brain at work simultaneously. It combines the power of cognition, which is slow and conscious, with perception, which is instantaneous. So for those of you who don't want to nerd out on the science side of things quite so much, I've got an example that really brings this to life in a very visual way, which is appropriate. I'm going to show you some data on the screen, and I'm going to start a 10-second timer. And in that 10 seconds, I want you to try to take notes of any trends or patterns or insights that you can find based on that quick window of time. Ready? Here we go. All right, so that's time. Drop a comment. Let me know. Were you able to see anything or interpret anything about that data? Maybe you got a general sense of size or scale. Eric commented, 15.25 is the biggest number. Maybe you noticed that we've got 4 different products we're looking at over time, 12 products over the period of a year. So maybe some kind of shallow surface level insights. Now I'm going to show you the exact same data set visualized and start a 10-second timer one more time. And we're going to go through that same exercise. Ready? Go. All right, so that's time. Hopefully, you're able to generate a few more insights, capture a few more of these trends, right? Very, very quickly, you can see that product A has been on an upward trend with a dip in month 6. Product B has kind of steadily risen and flattened out around month 10. Product C was pretty flat until month 11. And it looks like product D follows some sort of a quarterly seasonal cycle there. And that's a tremendous amount of insight or pattern recognition that I was able to gather in that same tiny window of time compared to viewing that data in raw numerical table format. And that is the power of data visualization in a nutshell. And for anyone who's curious, this is our own variation of something called Anscone's Quartet. All of these series share very similar descriptive stats, but the visuals show that they tell very, very different stories in terms of time series patterns. So thinking about how to approach data visualization and how to visualize data effectively, we always start with 3 key questions. Question 1 is, what type of data are you working with? Is it geospatial? Is it time series, financial, text, hierarchical? Many times that will dictate which visual is most appropriate to capture and communicate that certain type of data. Number 2, what exactly are you trying to communicate? Is it a comparison between series or objects? Is it a composition, a relationship, a distribution? Again, that's going to help you understand which type of chart or visual will help you tell that story most clearly. And then finally, arguably most importantly, who is the end user and what do they need? Are you building this visual for a peer or fellow analyst? Is it for a manager, an executive, the CEO of the company, or is it an infographic for the general public? These decisions, who you're designing for, will have a very, very big impact on how you choose to visualize your data. So let's kind of unpack each of these questions in a little bit more depth. Number one, what type of data are you working with? Again, this is just a sampling of some of the types of data you're likely to encounter. Time series, right? Values over time, very common. Geospatial for mapping, categorical data, hierarchical, financial, textual, funnel data, text data from surveys. Bottom line here, again, is that the type of data that you're working with will often determine which type of visual best represents it. So common examples, using maps to represent geospatial data, line charts to represent time series, tree maps for hierarchical, bar or column charts for categorical. That's step one, is understanding the type of data. I see a question right here, an example of funnel data. That would be something like you've got data points that represent stages in a sequential order or series. Like simplest case is people running a race, a marathon. How many people started? How many hit the 5K mark? How many hit the halfway mark? And how many people finished? That's kind of a funnel progression, which is very effectively visualized using something like a funnel chart. So once you got a grasp on question one, then you have to think about what you're actually trying to communicate here. You're not just trying to build a chart that looks pretty or is nice eye candy on the page. It needs to actually communicate something. And there are 4 categories generally that you're typically trying to communicate. It's either a comparison, a composition, a distribution, or a relationship. So as the name suggests, comparisons are about comparing values over time or across series. Common visuals that you'll see in this bucket are column and bar charts or clustered columns and bars, line charts or area charts, and funnel charts if you have very clear sequential stages. Compositions are when you're used or when you're trying to break down the component parts of a whole. This is where you might use visuals like 100% stacked bar or stacked columns, pie or donut charts. It's a whole separate conversation about whether you're pro or anti pie or donut charts. We'll save that for another time. Stacked area charts, great way to show both composition and trending in the same visual. Then you've got distributions. This is to show the frequency of values within a series. Very, very commonly used with histograms and density plots. You can also use things like plots like box and whiskers or violin plots to show the distribution of values within a series. And then last but not least, you've got relationships. And relationships are when you're trying to show correlation between multiple variables on an X and a Y axis. So scatter plots and bubble charts are the most common visual to show relationships. You can also use data tables and heat maps, correlation matrices, etc. I see a comment here, waterfalls before donuts. Love it. We've got some anti-donut people in the crowd. If we've got time at the end, I would love to have an open debate about that one. So bottom line here, and this is a really important point, is that it's easy to feel overwhelmed when you look at the universe of charts and graphs at your fingertips. You've got all these tools like Power BI and Tableau and even Excel, where you've got 30, 40, 50, 100 different visual types to choose from. And my advice to you is to keep it simple. Focus on the most essential charts first. Simple variations of bar charts, column charts, and line charts are often sufficient for like 99% of analyses. And then when you have something that's a bit more complex or a bit more custom or specialized, that's when you can start introducing different chart types. And for those of you who follow Maven on LinkedIn or have participated in our public data challenges, I know I saw Marjolaine in the comments who has participated in a whole lot of them and done an amazing job in finals. One of the most common mistakes that we see over and over and over again is people choosing chart types based on what looks pretty or what fills a certain space on the page. And they make those decisions at the expense of clarity, which is a mistake. And that's something we're going to talk about a little bit more later in the session. So that's question 2. Let's move on to question 3. Yes, keep it simple. The KISS acronym. I love it. On to our third key question. So who is the end user and what do they need? What's crazy is that the most common mistake in terms of these 3 questions that we see people make is they ignore this final question. They are only thinking about themselves and thinking about how I want to design the visual, how I want to format and style it. And they're not putting themselves in the shoes of the stakeholder, the person who's actually going to be receiving this chart or consuming this chart or making decisions based on this chart. And that's a huge, huge mistake, because that's where you get this lapse in communication. And that's where dashboards and visuals go to die, is when there's a break in communication or a break in expectations between the visual producer and the consumer. So for sake of example, let's say you're producing a visual, and it might be targeted to one of these three different audiences: the analyst, the manager, the executive. An analyst is someone who might like to see the details. They want to understand what's happening, what are the root causes, what are the drivers. So granular, perhaps more complex visuals might be appropriate for a fellow analyst here. Something like tables, pivots, combo charts, things like that. As you move up the chain, right, to middle management, typically managers want more summarized data. They care about taking action on the data. So they want you as the analyst and the visual designer to do the heavy lifting and help them understand what are the actual insights that are going to help me do my job and operate the business. So keeping it simple with common charts and graphs, right? Maybe some detail, but only if it supports a specific insight that you're trying to communicate. And then all the way on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the executive, like the CEO of the company. This is someone who just needs the absolute fastest, most efficient transfer of information possible, right? So high level, crystal clear KPIs, things that are going to help them understand business health, top line performance, KPI cards, super simple charts, minimal detail. The only time you share real in the weeds detail for executives is if it's adding critical context to those KPIs. So I think this paints a pretty good picture of what that spectrum looks like and how your visual analysis might be tailored to different types of audiences. And that basically just summarizes what I said. So I used the word context, and I think context is an extremely important topic in the scope of data visualization. It's something I've written about and posted about quite a bit. And I want to show you an example of why context is so important. And the reason it is that context is what gives numbers meaning, and it's what helps users interpret those numbers accurately. So here's a good example. Suppose that you are an executive at Acme Corporation, and one of your analysts comes to your desk and says, "Hey boss, we had 690 unit sales in October." How do you react to that? Is that good? Is that bad? Are the sales going up? Are they going down? Were we expecting more or fewer sales in October? The problem here is that this number lacks context. And because it lacks context, the stakeholder has no idea how to interpret it, or more importantly, how to take action based on it. So now suppose that the same analyst came to your desk and gave you something like this, okay? Now we're still showing that same KPI value of 690 unit sales, but we're also showing that performance compared to last month, down 4%, and last year, up 9%. We're comparing that performance against our business target, in this case, 650. We're trending out those sales over time to show time series patterns, and we're highlighting high and low points, as well as year-over-year trends. So the amount of information that we're able to pack into this visual and the amount of context that we're able to provide is incredible. And it allows us to reach conclusions like this. Yes, we drove 690 sales in October. We all knew that. But now what we also know is that we're down a little bit versus last month, but we're still up 9% year over year. And we actually exceeded our target in September and October after falling short in August. Based on time series, we're seeing an upward trend throughout the year with a pretty big peak in July. And based on last year's seasonality, we can expect a pretty strong November and December. So just compare that against the initial presentation of that unit sale number without context, right? The amount of information that we're able to understand with this additional context is incredibly valuable. And for anyone who who has followed me on LinkedIn, there's another example that I often share, which is a bit more real world or non-business based. But it's like going to the doctor's office for a health check, and they say, they do your checkup, right? And they check your vitals, and they say, all right, Chris, your triglyceride index is a 17.2. And then the doctor just walks away and leaves. How do you react to that? It's the same concept here, right? Like, am I sick? Am I healthy? Is that good? Is that bad? Am I getting better? Like, what's the diagnosis and what do I do? That same exact concept applies in the business world too. And that's why context is so important. All right, so it wouldn't be a data viz presentation if we didn't talk about some common data viz mistakes. Again, a lot of these are pulled from common mistakes that we see in the real world in our data challenges. Mistake number one, the most common one, is choosing the wrong chart type for the data. So here we're looking at US spend by food type, beef, chicken, fish, and pork, and we're showing that with a line chart, which is really only appropriate for time series data. When you do something like this, you create a trend and a pattern that doesn't actually exist. So there's nothing that's moving up and down and back up. It only looks like that because that's how we're conditioned to interpret lines. If you show that categorical data using a bar or a column chart, ideally sorted like this, it tells the story much, much more clearly. Another common mistake here, showing too many series in a single visual. Show of hands, how many people have seen charts like this? We've got something like, I don't know, 12 or 15 different line charts here. It's just a mess. There's way too much noise. You can't interpret what the story is, what line I'm even supposed to be looking at here. So using pre-attentive attributes and highlighting only the series that you want users to focus on, and either removing or desaturating or de-emphasizing the other series can be a great way to draw focus and attention into the places that you want people to pay attention to. Another good example of this, I'm telling you, we see this 100 times every time we run a challenge, a pie chart like this with 10 plus series, and it's a mess. Too many colors, too many segments. There's really no insight that comes from it. Cases like this, one of the best things you can do is use grouping techniques to group the categories that aren't as important and really draw focus to the one or two categories that matter. Couple more common mistakes. One is providing or failing to provide meaningful context or clear labels. So in this case, we've got a chart that doesn't have data labels. It doesn't have access titles. We don't know what the lines represent or what values we're actually looking at here. So just be smart about using descriptive titles and data labels as well. And then last one here, using inconsistent colors between related visuals. So you might see something like this, two charts on the page. You've got a donut chart and a bar chart. And in one case, chicken is represented with the blue color. And in the other chart, it's represented in green. This is just making the user do so much work to try to understand, okay, in this chart, chicken's blue, and this one, it's green. It's just unnecessary mental leaps that you're making your audience go through. Always simplify, always be consistent. And when you do that, you can actually remove some ink on the page too, get rid of some extra legends, and visualize it using a technique like you see here, which is much, much more clear. All right, so we've talked about kind of individual visuals. Now let's talk about the concept of a dashboard. For anyone in Aaron's Power BI session earlier this morning, this should look a little bit familiar. But the way we define dashboards here at Maven Analytics is that they're tools that are designed to consolidate data from multiple sources, track key metrics at a glance, and here's the most important part of the definition, facilitate data-driven decision-making. And so basically you might have product data from an internal system, gross revenue from a finance platform, transactional records from point of sale, customer data from a CRM system. A dashboard can integrate all these data sources together, visualize it in a really effective and clear way, and create a centralized user-facing dashboard that, again, your audience can use to make decisions. So what I want to run you through here is our dashboard design process. I'm going to cover this relatively quickly. There's a lot of depth here. The good news is that all of this is covered in our Thinking Like an Analyst course, which is completely free through all of Open Campus, along with all of our other courses. So don't worry about like scrambling to take notes right now. It's going to take some time to digest. Jump into that course and you'll run through this again. But I want to give you a quick kind of high level run through because I think this is a really strong and really intuitive framework for building extremely effective data dashboards. So it all starts with designing the purpose. And there can be many different purposes for dashboards. It might be an exec style KPI report. It might be a deep dive into more granular performance. It might be kind of an open-ended exploratory analysis, or it could be an infographic that's designed for something like print, like a magazine or a website. And those are all types of dashboards, but they serve very different purposes. So how you actually approach the design of that dashboard is very much a function of the purpose it's serving, and again, also the audience that it's serving as well. So at this stage, step one, the types of questions that you're going to be asking yourself, again, who are the end users of the dashboard? What do they need? What are their key business goals and objectives? What are their motivations? What are the most important questions that they need answers to? And how can my dashboard help them answer them? And then some technical stuff like how frequently is the dashboard going to be reviewed? From there, we get into step two, which is choosing the right metrics. So once you've defined the purpose, now it's time to identify which specific metrics and KPIs you actually want to include. And the key here is to focus on the metrics that directly align to those key business goals and end user motivations. You also want to do things like consider the level of detail most appropriate for the audience based on that scale that we talked about earlier. How much detail do you want to show or hide based on who you're presenting to? So the key questions here would be, which metrics accurately measure each of these business goals, and what level of detail is appropriate for each of those metrics? You probably don't need transactional records minute by minute for an executive KPI report, for instance, right? Like maybe weekly, maybe monthly would be more appropriate for something like that. And a pro tip here, common mistake that we see from people is that oftentimes young analysts or new analysts are tempted to include everything in the dashboard. Almost like a means of showing off and trying to get credit for all the work that you did. I'm going to stuff everything I built into this dashboard. But that's counterproductive. Remember that when it comes to dashboard design, oftentimes less is more, and focusing on the metrics that matter is a much, much more effective strategy in the long run. All right, we're cruising now. Let's go to step three. We've defined the purpose. We've chosen the right metrics. Now it's time to present our data effectively. So again, dashboards are all about communicating info quickly and clearly. So the key here is to use charts and visuals that are well suited to the types of data that you're working with. Again, question one of our three key questions, the story we're communicating, question two, and the end user consuming that information, question three. You can also do things like add filters to create interactivity if you want an exploratory vibe to your dashboard as well. But really the tip here, and again, this is kind of what I alluded to earlier, is that one of the most common mistakes is prioritizing things like visual style and variety over effectiveness. So if you find yourself doing that, step back and remember that it's all about choosing the right chart for the job. What tells the story most clearly and most effectively? All right, step four, this is a big one, eliminating clutter and noise. Oftentimes the default charts and graphs in these BI tools are just loaded with extra bells and whistles that do nothing but distract from the actual point that you're trying to make. And remember that when you're building dashboards, every square inch of real estate is precious. So you have to learn how to be a little bit ruthless about cutting anything that's taking up space, but not adding value. So all these crazy things like wild background images, 3D formats, animations and movement, chart borders, all that is noise. And all that does is really distract the user from the bottom line story or the insight that you're trying to communicate. So a little kind of bottom line here, and then one of my favorite quotes. So remember, clarity always trumps aesthetics when it comes to communication and data storytelling. And I think this quote here really captures it quite well, which is, perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And I think that's a really important philosophy to be thinking about as a report or dashboard designer, that you shouldn't be asking yourself, what else can I add to this report to make it better? You should be thinking about, what can I take away from this report to make it better? And that's a really big kind of mental shift that, I think really separates a good analyst and visual designer from a great one. Step 5, using layout to focus attention. A good layout features the most important insights and trends up front. And more importantly, it should guide the viewer through a very logical story. The last thing you want to do is force your users to try to connect the dots and piece together the story on their own. You want to make it as simple as possible to follow the narrative on the page. So a couple tips that can be super helpful for focusing attention. Use pre-attentive attributes like size, color, positioning to highlight key data points or draw attention to specific patterns. Just like the example of the 15 series line chart, where we drew attention to just 2 of those series and we de-emphasized the others. That's an example of using pre-attentive attributes. Gestalt principles, which are common, it's a common set of design principles, can be super helpful here as well. Using tools and techniques like proximity, enclosure, and connection to group related visual elements of the dashboard can have a really big impact on perception and intuition. And then finally, this is one of my favorite techniques, is considering common reading patterns. So things like Z patterns or F patterns when you're designing your dashboard layout are really, really valuable tools to make sure that your user is starting or focusing in the right place and then capturing the most important information in a really clear and logical way. And their eyes aren't bouncing around the screen from the top right to the bottom left. Because again, all that's doing is distracting from the story that you're trying to tell. I see some comments from Eric. Same page. Great minds think alike. I'm one step ahead of you here. I love it. Last thing here. So step 6, tell a clear story. So important, right? Like we're human beings. We're not inspired by numbers. Even the nerdiest of analysts aren't inspired by numbers. We're inspired by stories. And the most effective dashboards that you'll ever see, the ones that have the biggest impact in terms of driving actual real world business outcomes, are the ones that use data to tell clear and comprehensive and compelling data-driven stories. And it's those stories that help stakeholders find the insights or use the insights that you've delivered to take action and actually make a difference. Because this might sound obvious, but it's something that we see time and time again. If your dashboard doesn't actually facilitate change, if it doesn't drive any action, what purpose does it serve, right? Like you might create the most beautifully designed, most technically complex and proficient dashboard that the world has ever seen. But if no business decision is made from that dashboard, you have not done your job, or you have not earned your pay as an analyst. And that's really important. I think everyone focuses a bit too much on, the beauty of a dashboard or how effective these charts are. You have to take it to the finish line and think about how they impact the business trajectory or the decisions that are made. That is the key to analytics. And that's where we add value as data professionals. So pro tip here, don't be afraid of a little text when it comes to storytelling. A lot of times people feel like those default chart and axis titles are set in stone. They're not. And in fact, that real estate is really valuable. And it's a great way to create narratives that flow through your dashboard. I'm going to show you a great example of exactly what that looks like in just a second. So that is our 6-step dashboard design process. Now here's the fun part. Let's make it tangible. Let's make it real and actually walk through an example of this framework in action. So I'm going to blast through this a little bit quick in the interest of time. But again, this is available as part of our Thinking Like an Analyst course. Enrique teaches this section and it's fantastic. Definitely recommend digging in if this is catching your interest. But here's the situation. Let's pretend that you've just been hired, excuse me, as a lead BI analyst for Maven Toys. It's a nationwide chain of toy stores. And your first assignment is to design a dashboard for regional sales managers to help them track revenue trends by region. They're going to review that dashboard one time each month, and they need information on sales trends, product performance, and lost revenue due to inventory shortages. Okay, so that's our assignment and our objectives. We're going to run through those 6 steps in our framework, and we're going to try to see how this can translate into a really effective dashboard. Sound good? Give me a thumbs up if you're up for the challenge here. All right, I got some emojis popping up. Let's do it. All right, so step 1, define the purpose. Let's ask ourselves some questions. Who will be the end users of our dashboard? Well, if you think back to our brief, it was the regional sales managers. What are their key business goals and objectives? Increase revenue, minimize revenue loss due to lack of inventory. What are the most important questions that they need answers to? Revenue trends. Are we going up? Are we going down? What are the key drivers behind revenue? Are there any products that are missing from stock that we're losing money on? Things like that. And then again, finally, how frequently will the dashboard be reviewed? Once a month. Perfect. So step 1, we've defined the purpose. We know who we're designing for, and we know what they need and what questions they're going to try to get answers to. So we're off to a great start. Now let's dig into step 2, choosing the right metrics. This is a kind of template that we often use internally. It tends to work quite well, but feel free to use whatever style you prefer. What we're doing here is basically defining what metrics align with the business goals that we care about. And in step 1, we've already decided that increasing revenue and minimizing revenue loss due to lack of inventory were our 2 big business goals. So now we're going to start thinking about the metrics that support them. Whoa, that was weird. I made balloons somehow, and I don't know how I did it. That was fun. So for increasing revenue, what are some metrics that could help us understand that business goal? Total revenue, month-over-month revenue trending, month-over-month percent change, year-over-year percent change, metrics like that. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is an example just to illustrate the types of metrics that align with those goals. And then to minimize revenue loss due to lack of inventory, revenue stock or product stock on hand, and estimated monthly revenue loss would be great metrics to support those goals. And then we can think about level of detail here. For revenue, we really want to dig into some root cause analysis here. So maybe we want to get pretty granular there. Revenue by date, by region, by category, even by store and product would be really helpful there. And then for some of these other metrics, maybe it's a little bit higher level. So just the region level, just the category. This is typically an iterative process. You're not going to nail it on the first try, but this is a good illustration of where you might land after going through step 2 of the framework. All right, so step 3, we've got our purpose, we've got our metrics. Now, how do we present or visualize those metrics at that level of detail most effectively? So we've got a list of those metrics and level of detail on the left, and now we can kind of map those to different visual types that might be a good fit for effectively communicating them. So we've got line chart for revenue trending, a KPI card maybe to show total revenue, a bar chart for a categorical breakdown of revenue. Maybe we want more granular tables for revenue by product, things like that. And maybe we want some high-level filters as well to give it a little bit of an exploratory vibe. If we want to filter down for a certain month or a certain region, filters can help us do that as well. So again, don't feel overwhelmed as if you need to know the answers to these immediately. Typically, the way this works in the real world is that you'll take a first pass, realize that you might need a little bit of a different level of granularity. Maybe you have some metrics that you don't need, or you have some gaps you need to fill. You'll go back, think back to the metrics again. It's an evolving iterative process. No one is going to come up with this list off the top of their head on the fly like I'm doing now. You would have to be some sort of prodigy to do that. So that's step 3. Now we know which visual types are going to align with the metrics we care about, which are directly aligned to the business goals that our stakeholders care about. So on to step 4. Actually, well, presenting the data effectively in visual format. Maybe this is what we end up with, right? We've chosen the right metrics. We've chosen appropriate visual types. You can see we've got our line chart here. We've got some bar charts. We've got KPI cards and tables. So technically, we've done our job with steps 1, 2, and 3. We've done nothing wrong to get to this point. But like, let's be honest, this is pretty ugly, right? There's too much here. I don't really know where to look. There's a lot of noise, and it just looks, I don't know, it looks like we could do better. So that's what takes us to step 4, right? It's super busy. Step 4, this is where we eliminate some of this clutter and noise. And this is a little bit of a mix of art and science, but this is where we can do things like get rid of extra grid lines and data labels, like so. We can simplify colors, remove chart borders and backgrounds and extra legends. We can get rid of ink on the page with things like matrices and tables. We don't need grid lines and cell dividers. We can use some conditional formats to really draw attention to the columns that matter, like percent change or revenue change. And then we can use color again with those KPI cards to really draw attention to what matters to our stakeholders. So step 4, that process of eliminating clutter and noise, had a huge impact on readability. But we can do better, right? Let's go to step 5 now and think about how to use layout to focus attention. Because right now, we haven't really been thoughtful about where we're putting these visuals. We've got revenue numbers on the left. We've got product categories in the lower left. We've got revenue trending kind of in the middle there. Arguably our most important piece of real estate from a reading pattern standpoint, that top left corner, we're kind of wasting on the logo, right? So what if we updated our header to kind of draw attention to the purpose first? This is our regional sales dashboard for September 2021. Move the logo over to the right. And now let's rearrange these components in a way that makes use of reading patterns and Gestalt principles like proximity and enclosure and similarity. So here's a great example. We take all of our revenue related metrics, our KPI cards and our line charts, and we use grouping tools and design tools to show, hey, this is the most important information. We want you to start here so that you can very quickly understand this is our current total monthly revenue, and this is how we're trending year over year. Boom, done. From there, we go a little bit more granular. Now, instead of top line revenue, we're drilling into revenue at the product category level. So the eye is kind of moving from the left to the center of the screen. Here we've got our product category breakdown: toys, arts and crafts, sports, electronics, and games, with that percent revenue change kind of right next to it, almost as if this is a single visual. So we're really minimizing ink on the page without sacrificing clarity here. Then we get even more granular as we move down to the bottom right. Now we're at the actual individual product level, not just category. So this is the most detailed granularity. It's kind of in the lowest rightmost portion of our dashboard. And finally, we can pull in the revenue loss due to lack of stock, which was our second big business objective, and kind of use Gestalt principles to package that information into a nice little visual here on the right. So already we've made a tremendous amount of progress just jumping from step 3 to 4 and 5. Now we take it to the finish line. This is where we start to think about the story, right? So we're still kind of using those default chart titles here. They're not bad, right? They're accurate. It tells us what we're looking at total revenue by date, top and bottom 5 products. But here's where we can leverage those titles and that text and that real estate to tell our story in an even more powerful and impactful way. Ready? So this is before, this is after. So notice how the titles kind of changed. I'm going to go back one more time. So this is before, this is after. Notice how we're using text, we're using bolding, we're using colors to really map the text and the titles to the data that you're seeing on the screen. So, and we're using plain English too, to really turn this dashboard from just a series or collection of visuals into an actual story or narrative that you can follow, right? This is how much revenue we generated. And this is the trend in 2021, blue line, versus 2020, gray line. Here's the revenue split by product category this month, where these 5 products drove the increases and decreases in revenue. So that's the evolution of a dashboard from step 1 to step 6. And I knew someone was going to call this out. I wanted to update this, but I didn't have time. My only criticism of this view that we're looking at here, reds and greens might seem like the obvious choice for up and down, good and bad metrics, but unfortunately they're not very colorblind friendly. So I recommend blues and oranges instead, which are more accessible to a broader population and still can accomplish the same outcome. Blues for good, oranges for bad. But I think that wraps up our case study. I'm going to close this out with some key takeaways just to drive home, I think, some of the most important points here. Number 1, always answer the 3 key questions when you're visualizing data. What type of data? What are you communicating? Who's the end user? Keep it simple, KISS, by eliminating noise and distractions. And remember that quote, one of my favorites, perfection is achieved, not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. Tell a story by focusing the viewer's attention, using those Gestalt principles, those layouts, those reading patterns. And remember that context is key, because context is what makes the data mean something, and it helps users interpret them more accurately. So that's my spiel. That wraps up my session. Again, I apologize. Thank you for bearing with me with my frog voice. Hopefully I'm in better shape for my sessions tomorrow, but got a little bit of time here. I'll stick around, and if there are any questions that I can address, let's do a little bit of Q&A. All right, let's see. I got some medicinal advice here, which is great. I've been living on tea and cough drops all morning, so children's throat spray, good tip.
Yeah, I want to say thanks to everybody who's been so active in the comments. It's been this has been a really, really cool session. People asking questions to other folks in here, and just a lot of folks weighing in. Really, really appreciate it, you guys.
Yeah, John, any common themes or any questions that you might want to surface? I wasn't really able to keep an eye on the chat too closely as I was presenting here.
I think a lot of the questions you answered, and other folks were kind of just reiterating their perspective, which was generally pretty similar. So it was really, really good discussion. I'm just gonna see if there's in the questions tab, there's a few pretty good questions in here. I'd recommend there's 3 that I think we could jump into those. So
yeah. So share the presentation. This is part of our Thinking Like an Analyst course. Every course has downloadable resources, all of the slides, project files, data sets, all free to download for every one of our courses. Jump into Thinking Like an Analyst. You'll get all these slides. We've got more popping in.
Oh, yeah.
How much data is too much data on a dashboard? It depends. That's almost always my answer. It depends on the context. Who are you presenting to? What level of detail do they need? And most importantly, what data is going to be sufficient for them to answer the business question or objective at hand? I think that's ultimately what matters most.
Yep.
How do you plan when the client wants to constantly add features to a dashboard? Love that question. Very real challenge that we often encounter as analysts, especially in the client services realm. You kind of have to be a project manager as well as an analyst, and you can try to make a case. Ultimately, I think sometimes you have to make concessions based on what stakeholders want or what they need. But if you put your best foot forward and leverage these best practices, I think that's the best you can do. And then again, sometimes you might get pushback, or you might get clients who want some crazy Sankey diagram or something wild. And once in a while, you might have to just bite the bullet and give them what they want. But generally, I think we're giving you guys a good framework to put your best foot forward. Let's see how to deal with lack of data literacy as consumers. Hard to communicate to managers when they want Excel tables. Really good one. Trying to think of the best way to answer that one. I think the data literacy theme and topic is such a big one, and it's something we care so much about because, simply put, data skills aren't just for analysts anymore. Data skills are ubiquitous. Analysts really don't live in silos anymore. Everyone who encounters data on the job, to some extent, is an analyst, whether you're an HR associate, whether you work in sales or finance or product. And I think the best thing we can do is understand our audience, know when we're delivering a visual or report or data set that is going to someone with a lower level of data literacy than a professionally trained analyst, and make decisions that simplify what you're presenting as much as you possibly can. Anything to add to that one, John? It's a great question.
Just that. I think with folks like that, you will just usually give them less. Like if Chris and I are having a discussion about our business and I've been digging into the data, we're often getting pretty granular. Like I'll start with the stuff at the top and we go down into the nitty gritty. But if you're talking to somebody who's less data literate, it's usually a shorter discussion. And the biggest thing is, if you have 2 to 3 points you really want them to take away, there's no way that you can show another 7 or 8 points to give them 10 pieces of information and expect they're going to retain it all. So just, we usually will keep it pretty light with those types of folks.
Absolutely. I just realized I can feature questions on the screen, which is pretty cool. For consistent colors, use a theme. Yes, themes are great. Most tools, Excel, Power BI, Tableau, have built-in themes where very talented color theorists and designers have put together colors that generally complement each other very well. So starting with a theme is a great starting point. If you don't use a theme, the simple advice here is generally fewer colors are better. Your report shouldn't look like a rainbow. And if it does, you might be doing something wrong. Here's another good one. How do you handle storytelling in a dynamic dashboard? So with automatic data refresh, this kind of gets into a topic of exploratory versus explanatory analysis. And you might build a dashboard that's designed for an exploratory analysis. And by exploratory, I mean, you are giving the end user the tools to explore the data, and you've built the dashboard to support that. In those cases, you generally won't have a predefined narrative because the idea is exploration, right? It's about finding those insights and those nuggets. Whereas if the purpose is explanatory, that means you're trying to tell a specific story or communicate a certain insight. And for those types of purposes and those types of dashboards, this type of narrative style tends to be a much better fit. So I think it kind of depends on which approach you're taking or which purpose you're focusing on. What other course is similar to thinking like an analyst? It depends. I mean, that's the one that we recommend most people start with because it sets that really strong foundation. It's not technical. It helps you build these really critical foundational skills like measurement planning, data viz best practices, things like that before you go off into the technical world and start writing code and doing work in Tableau and Power BI and Python and all that. The most similar course in some ways might be our Launching Your Data Career course, in that that is our other non-technical course, and it includes all sorts of resources for people who are looking to break into or transition into a data career, including things like resume writing, portfolio building, interview prep, which I'm going to talk about in our live session tomorrow. Everything you need to make yourself really appealing and stand out for potential recruiters and employers. So that one is similar in the sense that it's not really tool focused and not technical. Let's see. Oh, here's a cool one. How do you anticipate the importance of data viz and storytelling skills with change with AI? I think they get more importance. You know, to be honest, that's kind of the answer to a lot of these AI questions. Like, you know, do I still need to learn these analytical thinking skills? Like, yes, absolutely. They become even more important because AI is an amazing tool for analysts and data professionals, but that's all it is. It's a tool. And where it really adds value is when you've got a skilled practitioner behind the wheel yielding that tool. So I've seen some really impressive things with ADA and with GPT-4. But one thing that I've not, to be totally honest, not been sold on or impressed by yet is the ability of AI to match the level of insight and intuition that a human, well-trained analyst can. So I think these skills are timeless, and I think they're going to remain extremely important even as AI gains popularity. What BI tool was I using for this session? All this stuff, all the demos, the case study, that was all built in Excel, actually. But it really could be any tool. Here's a good one. I think this is probably the last one. So how do you build one report for various stakeholders, junior staff, manager, CEO, or what point do you create two separate reports? Again, it kind of depends on the context. I think generally speaking, if you know that there are two very different audiences consuming a report, that's usually the line that I would draw and say, hey, I'm going to give you one report that's appropriate for the junior staff and one that's appropriate for the CEO. There are some fancy things that you can do with report views, but generally speaking, I would say I'd rather have separate reports that are designed deliberately for certain audiences than to try to blend them into one kind of Frankenstein report. That's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, one way we sometimes approach that is like you might have like a super high level executive sheet, and then there could be other tabs that go deeper into different areas of the business. You know, so you might have like the revenue dashboard with that has high level customer information, revenue, that type of stuff, and then you might go deeper into things like customer support, marketing, in other tabs that are, you know, applicable to other folks. So you might have like somebody running the business who wants to occasionally look at all of them, but maybe just focus on the front sheet. And then, you know, your marketing team will likely just focus on the other one. But whether that's like one report or two different reports is very situational.
Awesome. So I think we're right at time. It's 2 o'clock here, probably much later for a lot of you guys in the chat and on the call. So thank you. Thank you for dialing in from all over the world and for spending your evening with us. I'll hand it over to John, but I just want to say, you know, what a way to kick off Open Campus. I sat in all the sessions. I know, seeing some familiar names who have been here since this morning. So thank you so much. It's been great having everyone and such a great response to these sessions.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And especially thanks to Chris. I mean, you guys can hear it in his voice. I think he's worse than he sounds. And I just thank you so much for keeping your energy up and doing this incredible session. You could just see the comments the whole time. People were like, wow, this is such a good framework. You know, I think it's really helping folks. So thanks everybody for joining. This was day one. We think we had a great showing here, had a lot of folks join. We hope you'll come for day 2 tomorrow and day 3 on Friday. And again, just, you know, over the next 7 days, you've got 100% free access to every course we have ever made. Go get into it and enjoy it at mavenanalytics.io. And hopefully we will see you guys in the morning at or our morning on day 2. So thank you, everybody. And feel free to check out any of the sessions you missed. They'll be all on demand. So
awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.